Ja, det tänker jag vi har i en särskild övning möjligen. Hälso- och sjukvården.
Very good morning and welcome into Brenda and Anne and Victoria from the UK. I'm going to begin just by getting each of you to introduce yourselves very briefly. But before we do that, we've come out of that clip and I want to reread and leave this question hanging, reread what I wrote there or what was written there on the thread on X. I reposted this. Christian Democrat politician and Sweden's health minister suddenly goes down face first in the middle of a press conference. And the question that I quoted was, what do you think caused this? So I'm going to leave that hanging throughout this discussion we're about to have. All right. Would you be able to introduce yourself to Victoria, Brenda?
Kia ora, Victoria. My name's Brenda Hinton. I'm a consumer advocate and for many years a childbirth educator. I entered the kind of birth scene in the early 1980s when I was pregnant with my first child. At the time, I wanted to give birth at home and wasn't able to find a home birth midwife because of the conditions of employment of what we call domiciliary midwives at the time. And I've worked in the sector ever since, and I continue to work in partnership with midwives as a consumer representative.
Thank you. And Anne, your background, please.
Yeah, good morning, Victoria. Nice to meet you, and you, Liz. I actually went to Oldham District Hospital in Manchester to train as a direct entry midwife. I didn't want to be a nurse. I don't have that love and patience and skill of nurses, and probably didn't want to administer a lot of drugs. So I was lucky to get into that training in England. It was wonderful. I'm a Kiwi-born woman. I came back to attend home births because, as Brenda alluded to, there were unprincipled tactics being used by the government of the day to pay home birth midwives very, very badly in an attempt to starve out home birth. I met Brenda then in the early 80s, and we did find Joan Donnelly. She's famous here. She's passed away now. And yes, and since 1980, so I qualified in 81 in England, and since 83, I've attended approximately 2,500 births. I know this because I have the data from all of my notes. I've kept my hard copy notes, and that has some significance in that it's a body of work by a New Zealand midwife. I never ever bought a Doppler ultrasound machine. I only ever worked with the Panhard stethoscope, and now I'm working with Huia Kaimanawa Mandated Midwives Group, and we formed in 2022 in response to us being mandated out. And there was, we've recently been to the New Zealand College of Midwives conference, and there was a graph showing that over 200 midwives, 200 to 300 midwives lost their practicing certificates in 2022 due to the mandates, but that's never been acknowledged. So, yes, I'm very grateful that we have this wonderful group of mandated midwives. Most of them have gone back to work, but I won't renew my practicing certificate to give money to the Midwifery Council of New Zealand, who have prosecuted 7 midwives and are using midwives' funds for some pretty dastardly work in the middle of a quite acute midwife shortage. That's probably enough about me. Thanks.
There are many issues to get into there. I just want to pick up on that point. Why do you not use that Doppler and you prefer the stethoscope? Could you briefly enlarge on that, Anne, before we go to Victoria?
Liz, you want me to be brief? I'm probably going to write a dissertation about this one day. The Panhard stethoscope was how I was trained. We did not use ultrasound machines to hear auscultate fetal hearts. So it was the way I was trained. It has so many benefits, apart from the fact that it's a simple piece of a horn-shaped plastic that doesn't send ultrasound waves into the growing fetus. But there are so many implications to that, and I believe it's one of the technologies that really contributes to the cascade of unnecessary interventions, which we'll talk about later. Yes.
I think there is a PhD paper in there, Anne, inside you. I can feel it. And I think it's something we will come back to. But that's what a phrase, Victoria, a cascade of unnecessary interventions. Doesn't that lie at the heart of your courage to stand up and speak out? Could you tell us all a bit about your background and how you've got here?
Yes, thank you, Liz, for setting this up, but also for inviting me along. And thanks, Brenda and Anne, for both of your stories. I get goosebumps when I speak to people that just get it. They just understand when you've been in this institution of midwifery. So I've got 4 children, and I've used the NHS for 18 years to birth. 3 hospital births and 1 home birth, my 3rd being the home birth and my 4th being the worst birth as a midwife. And I saw the dramatic change and depletion of care of women and babies from when I had my first, who was in 2001, and my last in 2019. So not only have I used the system as a woman, I have been in the NHS over here since 2011, when I started volunteering in the maternity services and then became a midwife, student midwife into midwifery. And it was just a cult. That's all I'm going to call it. It's nothing more. It's a cult of a breeding of toxic practices, malpractice, malfeasance in office. It's that blunt, and public funds are being used fraudulently. Women are not, they're nothing. And that's the truth. And if I was honest now and I was sat with a woman, and as awful as this sounds, it's, you don't mean anything to the system. You're a figure. So I've learned along this journey that women are a financial figure, and they are not a financial figure if they home birth as much or if they free birth. And that's when you start questioning. If you're free birthing, you cost nothing to the system, and they don't want you to free birth, because when you free birth or when you have a home birth, the connection to your inner self and your higher self birthing is unbelievable, because I've done it. I had a 3rd birth where I birthed in my living room and had no one telling me what to do. And I stopped people from putting the heating on, and I did it my way. And no one had to tell me with their fingers that I was fully dilated. I knew I was fully dilated. And I also had this amazing experience. You can call it astral projection. You can call it spiritual disconnection. I left my body and I watched myself give birth in my living room. People might think that's crazy. Absolutely not. It is the most empowering moment of a woman's life. It's an initiation. You could call it a ritual. You could call it, I've got goosebumps. It is magic. And it was from that moment I wanted to be part of that in every woman's life every day, because it was like I could bottle it up. I wanted to give birth every day because of that experience. Mm-hmm. And when I went to become a midwife, I never saw that again, ever, ever. And it broke my heart. And I became a midwife that could not go to a home birth because I was frightened I didn't have an emergency team beside me to save her life. So I became a defensive, angry practitioner, angry that the woman wouldn't listen to me, angry that she's going to die, when I completely forgotten who I was and where I'd come from. It was eradicated from me very slowly, and it was corrosive is the only word I could use. And by the end of my career, it happened so quickly, but I also couldn't work it out. It was only when I walked out the door I realized how much of a cult it had been. And just to give you an oversight, since 2019, we have spent 27 billion in litigation claims in England. 27 billion. Maternity services makes up 51% of the whole NHS claims. We have got a 57% increase in maternal death since 2013. That's unbelievable. Women birthed before 1947 at home. And yes, sanitation wasn't great. We improved sanitation, but they also included the childhood vaccines around about that time and caused trickery amongst the population that the vaccine saved your life, but it was the sanitation that did. So there has been a whole planned assassination of women in the United Kingdom to the point our birth rates are the lowest since the 1970s. Our breastfeeding rates are the worst on record. And our birth trauma is about 1 in 3, and we have 600,000 women around that birthing. The statistics say that 4% in 1,000 women have a stillbirth. But the way they've written it is that they still say it's the same figure, but actually, if you've got a lower birth rate, your stillbirth rate's increased. So I have done a lot of soul searching. It's been a very traumatic journey for lots of reasons. But I think it's a time that the world of midwifery needs to start talking and seeing that this came from the West and it filtered out across the world. And I know this because there's a midwife in Africa who's saying that Western medicine is trying to infiltrate there, where she's got 100% home birth and maternity-led unit birth rate of survival.
I mean, Victoria, you are such an articulate spokesperson for
Liz,
it.
you're gone.
Can you not hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Wow.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Brenda, can you hear me?
Yes.
And you can't hear me?
I can't hear any of you. How strange.
How strange. They're trying.
This is happening a lot.
Yes.
A lot.
Because you're telling the truth.
If you can imagine. My emails have been playing up as well. I've had an email account closed this week.
Vic, we'll have to get you some real security.
Let me...
You'll have to go out and come in. I can put you in touch with some... Oh, she can't hear me. Isn't that interesting?
Let me try and go out and come back in.
We won't even speak because I really want your reactions, your visceral reactions to what she said. Isn't an extraordinary spokesperson?
Yes, well, I think that
perhaps, maybe while she's coming out and going in, we will. I'll go to that. Brenda, what is your reaction to what you've just heard?
Well, it all sounds, very familiar. Basically, that this is what has been happening, and I'm not surprised because Vic trained in the 21st century, but this is something that Anne and I had observed happening from the time that we joined in the 1980s and became involved in the birthing movement. Is that the increase in technology, the reduction in confidence of midwives with physiological birth. So and I mean the statistics are really, really similar. You'll know that the birth rate in New Zealand has plummeted to 1.6, which is way below replacement. We're only increasing our population by immigration, not by birth anymore. And the breastfeeding rates are appalling, and this has a real implication for infant and childhood health and ongoing health of the human population. And the birth trauma rates are soaring. I work currently for the Maternity Services Consumer Council, and a number of the women on our steering group have come to us out of an experience of birth trauma, realising in their first birth that the abuse that they suffered really, and wanting to ensure that never happens again, and that they are prepared to work to help prevent it happening for other women as well.
I watched exactly what you said, Victoria, with a family member. I helped her birth through the night. She was doing so well. Her confidence levels were right up. The next morning, some in-laws said, you must go to the hospital and at least have a checkup. The doctor at the hospital said, you will be back before nighttime because you will need us, and literally stole her confidence as a first-time birthing mother, stole it, from which point she had no belief in her own ability at all, and it ended up being an absolutely traumatizing birth with the ultimate intervention. And I wondered, is this what they do to the majority of mothers now? And what's your reaction when you hear what Victoria said before she was so rudely cut off by some outside forces? Thank you for coming back, Vic. And what was your reaction to what you heard Victoria say there?
Well, I was pretty shocked to hear about the maternal death rate increasing so much in UK. I don't know that would be true here. In New Zealand, I know that, as Brenda said, the birth rate is falling, breastfeeding rates are falling. Brenda and I recently spoke at the New Zealand conference, College of Midwives conference, and basically one of my old friends there, she's not been practicing for a long time, she said to me, because they reported at the conference that the Caesar rate in New Zealand in 2023 was 1 in 3 women, basically. It's over 30% now. And it's probably higher in 2025. And when I started practicing in New Zealand in 83, the Caesar rate was under 10%. It was 9.6%. And so when I was talking to this friend of mine, and I said, this is so appalling. And the conference didn't address this. They just reported this like just another statistic. I said, well, actually, that could be the value of my data, of my body of work. Because I said, my friend said to me, well, Anne, it's a changing world. Women are different now. Women are fatter. Women are sicker. Women want this. Women are asking for this. And I only stopped my independent practice in 2016. And so I worked consistently for nearly 40 years with my own practice, and my data hasn't changed. My transfer out of primary, which was at home births or, primary care, and with me as the midwife, my transfer rate has remained consistent over 40 years, well into this modern age, at under 11%. The Caesar rate's lower than that. The breastfeeding rates have remained high. So it's not, and also the demographic of the women I cared for was from mansions on the beachfront at Mount Maunganui to homes out the back beyond here in the Bay of Plenty with no electricity. The demographic of the women I cared for was ranging. It wasn't an exclusive, educated home birth client. And so, to me, it's around the system of care that's being given to these women. It's a woman-centred midwifery system. It's not a medicalised system. And that is the point. Yes, it is a very sad to observe. Brenda and I don't know if we said this, we were both founding members of the College of Midwives in 89, 90.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So, and I've given a huge amount to our profession. I've mentored many first-year graduates. I've had so many clinical placements with the third-year students. And yes, there's so much I could talk about. So for me, it's quite a grief and a sadness. I mean, for our profession, but for the women, for goodness sake. And also, I love the way Brenda particularly expresses, I might leave that up to you, Brenda, to talk about how birth is not something to be feared. And you alluded to that, both of you, Liz and Victoria. And my catchphrase, and I used to give all my students a Pinard stethoscope with the words love and confidence engraved on it. So I was always saying, work from a place of love and confidence. Mm-hmm. Don't work from a place of fear. It's not warranted. It's absolutely not warranted. We don't have to fear. We have to have our eyes open. We have to assess. We have to transfer when necessary. But that's not very common. Another thing, I'll just get in here because I think it's funny, and I didn't coin this, but Maggie Banks, a wonderful midwife in New Zealand who's written many books, said, we work in obstetrician-free zones. And I used to tell the obstetricians, who I knew well, that I used to avoid them like the plague.
Yes, that's how it should be. And it's not that at the moment. Perhaps there, before we come to you, Brenda, talking about what Anne was saying there, perhaps here, Victoria, you could drop in that story of your friend in Africa. Because for women who are listening to this, who are feeling horrified and thinking, you mean there's another way? You mean I could have done it differently? You mean that next time I have a baby, I could have other options? Tell us about your friend there, because it's such a beautiful story.
Yes, Anne, I just wanted to pick up one of the statistics I left out was that our cesarean section rates are almost hitting 50% in parts of our country.
Yes.
Induction of labour rates are about 52%. That's around about 495 women a day being induced, holding a bed space of about £305 a night. That's the statistic of Financial Money. So what I've done through this journey is I thought what I was feeling was I was on my own. I didn't know that other people, because midwives aren't allowed to speak out online. So I obviously, when I left, was thinking, well, how am I the only person to recognize all what's going on? And then when I left and I started to speak out, lots of beautiful people came forward and would start talking to me about their statistics. So there's a lady called Diane Lockhart, who is in Uganda in a place called Armani. And she left Ireland in the about 12 years ago. And 10 years ago, she set up her own practice in Uganda with just a pinard, a blood pressure cuff, and very minimal equipment, with just her heart skills, her nursing skills, because she was a nurse before for many, many years, and her very young daughter. And she was a single mum, and she went out there. I've got goosebumps again. This lady has had thousands of births, and never, ever has she lost a mother or baby in labour, ever. She doesn't have suturing equipment. These women don't tear. They turn up when they're 5 centimetres. They all pretty much stand together. I've got beautiful photographs of women from her clinic in corridors labouring together, holding space. No men. She said there's always trouble when the men arrive. And these women very rarely lie on the bed. They're instinctively aware that they need to stand and squat when it's time. And they squat over a bucket. She actually told me her transfer rate, I think, was about 7%. And when these women transferred, that's when there's always complications. It's not through her care. 100% breastfeeding feeding rates. And her home birth recently was her 11th baby, I think. She had all girls and the last one was a boy. And it was like £10, this baby. And she is the true essence of midwifery. She's wonderful, but she is a believer that midwifery skill needs to be there, that the doula skill is different to that of a midwife. She believes that it is about holding space when women want it. But when we speak to people like Nikita Stark, who's in the United Kingdom, and I like to say United Kingdom, that's the corporation, I'm going to say England. She has got when push comes to shove, and her home birth success rates are in the 90s. It's amazing. We've just intercepted so much. We have been taught a very Rothschild system. They're educating us their way. And actually the people that are educating are mainly men and not women. Yeah. And we have lost complete touch. And I'm a huge believer that most midwives, including myself, met women in a fear-based emotion. And I projected my fear onto her. She then had a fear-based birth. And I created a fearful environment for her. So I'm absolutely with you, Anne.
Before we move to you, Brenda, just a few terms there. Transfer rate, I take it, is transfer to hospital. Is that right? That's what you're talking about. And the difference of doula and midwife for people who aren't aware of that. How do you define that, Vic?
So a midwife is through their qualification. I'm a believer that if you've got to put a word in law,
you've got something to hide. So the word midwife is an English-derived word. They own it in law, apparently, and you have to have a qualification through their system to be a midwife. A doula is someone that holds space. They might palpate, they might listen in with a pinard, but they don't really intercept. They sit and it's woman-centered, and it's what the woman wants. She chooses her birth. A birth keeper might be someone that deals with herbs and herbology in birth. And there's some, again, it's all very confusing because some doulas call themselves doulas but work with herbs. Some people call themselves birth keepers and don't work with herbs. I think everybody should stop labeling it all. And we just need to go right back to basics and make sure every woman or young girl right now is prepared and in a space where she can nurture a baby and birth, and her own birth isn't based from any traumas. That's the only way we will start getting back to the beginning, and using the hospital in a more balanced way. And that's pretty much what I believe is the difference between us all. But yeah.
And Brenda, it all comes to that love and confidence Anne spoke about, does it not? It really is. I mean, these are ancient sciences. The herbalists who used to help women through, the women who used to hold space for women. These have been going since time immemorial, have they not, Brenda?
Well, yes, and you know, traditionally midwives or were trained in the sort of apprentice model that they'd follow the village midwife or the county midwife around and learn from experience with her. And but birth was accepted as normal, and that's what we've lost, and we'd already started to lose it, you know, probably back. As you said, Vic, you know, home birth was the norm until 1940. It was a bit early. It was more like the 1920s in New Zealand. I've forgotten what the exact statistic was, but by the end of the 1920s, women were starting to head into the hospitals to give birth, unfortunately. But yeah, so we've got to reclaim the culture that birth isn't a medical event, and it's what Anne was saying about we fought hard to get direct entry midwifery in training in New Zealand, because if you train as a nurse first, you're already in an illness model. We wanted midwives to come into midwifery knowing that birth is a normal physiological function, and how to support that physiology, psychology, the emotional kind of connection, how to support a woman to do what her body's designed to do, rather than actually looking for all the things that could go wrong and thinking that you have to do something to stop things going wrong all the time. But this is what the medical model does, right? From the very beginning of pregnancy now, women are exposed to so many tests and screenings and things that by the time they get to full term and having their babies, if they ever had confidence in the first place, it's been completely undermined by the processes that they've experienced during pregnancy.
One of the things, as someone from mainstream media, that I noticed as I left that world and observed it from the outside and became far more critically thinking, I noticed that any story about a midwife birth that went wrong was nearly always front page news. But I knew many, many friends who had births, including me with my first birth, that was medicalised and went horrifically wrong, to the point where the specialist called me in 6 months later and said, that was so mishandled by your doctor. But that never made the front page news, ever. You could do anything within the hospital system and the media would not jump on it. Outside the hospital system, you were persecuted. And what was the reason for founding the College of Midwives? What else? Brenda alluded to it there. You wanted the midwives not to have to go through nursing first and be programmable and brainwashed. What were the other reasons you wanted? Was it about this mutual support that we've got in this room here?
Well, in the right up to when we did found the College of Midwives, midwifery was a subsection of the Nursing Council. We didn't have our own regulatory body, and we didn't have our own educational systems. They were all under nursing. So it was a good move. It was spearheaded by consumer movements, by the home birth movement. Parent Centre came on board, and then the hospital midwives woke up to people like Joan and the home birth movement and people like Brenda working so hard to educate and awaken. And then, yes, it got momentum, and we formed the College of Midwives, and then shortly after that, the Midwifery Council. We had hopes of a fabulous new maternity system, actually, and that I think that I was called a domiciliary midwife prior to the foundation of the college because we were that very small. I think there were 20 of us in the country attending home births only. And as I said, we were, they tried to starve us out, etc. And we had such a strong link with our women. I couldn't have survived without the women supporting me. One time I moved town and the home birth woman who had no other home birth midwife there, they found me a house to rent. They were all farmers. They bought me food and vegetables, and it made all the difference. So we found the college with great hopes, but actually, as I said, the cesarean section rate when we founded the college, or just prior to, was very low. It was under 10%. And when we look at that, that's because women can give birth well, but also because there were not that many obstetricians. The obstetricians we had and the hospital midwives were committed. They were skilled and committed to vaginal birth outcomes. That was gold standard, was vaginal birth outcome. And, for example, the obstetricians had skills with forceps and rotational forceps and more confidence with breech vaginal birth and this and that. So what Brenda and I spoke recently at the conference on our reflections of the last 4 decades of a maternity system. And it's a source of grief to see that women are suffering so badly, and especially since the mandates, a lot of that 200 to 300, the 8 to 9% of us who were mandated were the primary care midwives, were the home birth midwives. It's interesting that we are also the critical thinkers, perhaps, not just, and our mandated group consists of home birth and hospital midwives who were, coerced into losing our jobs. So I think that was the question, Liz.
Yes, and that support should be there. But Vic, it's horrific in New Zealand, the number that we've lost. Has the same thing happened in the UK? Have many good critical thinking midwives who can see what is wrong with the system been forced out of the system, Vic, as far as you know?
Yeah, I think I looked it up. It was 5,000 midwives have left the NMC, the Nursing and Midwifery Register, since 2020. So those critical thinkers with that deep-rooted integrity who don't care about mortgage or rent over their belief system of what's happening to women have all walked. And the ones that remain have either turned a blind eye and acted in not, I would say, malicious ignorance. It's more of I'll pretend I didn't see it and just keep going. I would say it's that attitude. But the problem that I don't think people are even ready to understand and accept is the NHS is a for-profit organisation, and the Western world, particularly the United Kingdom as a corporation, they run midwifery across the world. They run that system. So everything that is born from the people that they pay to make those statistics, write those papers. We know that COVID was written by certain doctors to say that vaccines were safe in pregnancy. They were paid for that. They were paid to promote it. So we have to think, well, if that has happened there, well, how have we got here? It was a planned assassination to increase cesarean sections, because if it was a localized problem, it would just be happening in England, but it's not. It's happening everywhere across the Western world. So it's funneled from the top, from a very small bunch of probably narcissistic bored men at a table. Let's be honest, because true women connected to self and source would not allow this to happen. It wouldn't happen amongst women. That's why women are fighting for this, the right women. Now, I can't say I'm a a midwife or like you, Anne and Brenda, in this way, because I only did it for 6.5 years. I was still a novice. I still had adrenaline rush when a baby was born. I still didn't have the confidence to stand at a home birth and hold that space, because the system didn't enable me to grow in that way. So I came out of it like I've been spat out, of a lion's mouth. It was awful. So I've got a voice of, right, my critical thinking is this, but I don't have the underpinning of what you guys have. So I'm like this voice of stats and what I saw and what's going on. But these real fighters and warriors like yourselves who have stood by many, 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 many women and families and have seen those outcomes, that's the reason why you put one foot in front of the other every single day to campaign to make sure this doesn't happen. So we're all on a different piece of that puzzle. And somehow for me, it just so happened that one day in January, I put out my exit interview in the NHS and said that they were harming women. And I wrote to 650 MPs and said, this is clinical negligence. This is manslaughter. And I didn't get a response, but my whole following went up because I thought this impacts more people than I realised.
Can I say something to that, please?
Yes.
And that, Vic, is the grief for me. You are a beautiful, young, strong midwife, and you were able to sustain that practice for 6 years only. And so women have lost you. Women and their babies have lost you. And that's what I'm seeing in New Zealand. So many young midwives, how are women going to find good midwives? I'm going out the back door. My dear friend, Veronica, one of my closest colleagues, she's passed away now. We're in our 70s. We need you young ones. But then I completely understand that you need support. And so I just want to comment on that it's understandable that you're not able to hold that space in the home birth. It happened in the COVID years that we were, I could talk about working in a so-called illegal space, but it's changed since the mandates. It became so much more threatening, as we know from our midwives who've been prosecuted. So I just want to comment on that. I think we come back to what happened for us in the 80s. What happened for us midwives in the 80s was that women like Brenda and a few said, we're not accepting the system as it is, and reaching out to the few critical thinking midwives who still were able to practice in home birth and saying, attend us, please. And we did. And we went out on a limb. However, we had the women leading us, as it were, and we weren't paid well, and then the body of experience grew and grew and grew over the decades until one realised that actually a woman having her 10th and 11th babies, which I can talk about, they are not grand multips who are going to bleed. They're not high risk of PPH. The reality is actually, if they're eating well, if they're in reasonably good health, they do very well. And even, so yes. And so that clinical sharing, I'll call it clinical, but experiential being with women at birth, it's fantastic.
It's an art. It's an art. It's an art. I've always said it's an art. And it's like being in a community where, if you think about, I said this to my children the other day, one of you is a night owl and one of you is a morning bird. Either way, the campfire would never have gone out. Not only that, you would never have seen each other because you both would have had opposite roles within the family unit. But amongst that would have been the wiser women and the daughters and the children and the girls and the boys around who would have witnessed birth, who would have learnt, great-grandma did this. We've all been robbed of it because we live in cells, out of communities. That skill and that art has been burnt right back to the witch trials. I've talked about it many times. And here we are now, unable to sustain in this globalist system where the outcomes for birth are worsening every single year. And they're hiding the statistics, as well as women not understanding where to go to look for evidence and who to go to and who to listen to, because the midwives that do work at home, and this has been a big worry of mine, and I've made a big prediction of this, the home birth doulas and the birth keepers are doing great work out there right now, and they are holding up what the midwives are not able to do in the community. So their businesses are blooming because the women aren't getting the care in the community because it's been starved to the hospital. So the problem we've got here is that women who have potential edematous in their feet would ring the community midwife and say, I've got swollen ankles and it says in my notes to ring you. And what we would do is elevate your feet, make sure you're looking after yourself. Are you stressed? Do you need to sleep? What is your gestation? And you would soothe her concerns. She would then go away and probably never call you again. But unfortunately, because in England you can't get through to a midwife, you're then leaving it so long, you're getting to the hospital with severe edematous, more stress, more worry, which means you've got more intervention. But the doulas over here are now having to practice how to deliver dead babies because the hospitals are not giving that facility. So you've now got doulas picking up part of what is a midwife role in that remit. And then what will happen is, because women are sicker, more overweight, vaccine damage, have more comorbidities, diseases, diabetes, the doulas will then have to deal with much more high risk, which means they're not potentially trained for it, which will then brand doulas and birth keepers as dangerous, which will then put a whole stamp on don't use doulas and birth keepers. It'll go around in a vicious circle and everyone will run back to the hospital. It's a planned assassination.
My God, Vic, I had not heard that. Brenda, have you heard of that in New Zealand?
No, it's not, because we do still have the vestiges of what we call the lead maternity care midwifery model, where women, although we're desperately short of midwives, still the majority of women can access a midwife who provides care during pregnancy, labour and birth, and after her baby's born. So most women in New Zealand are able to contact a midwife. That is changing, unfortunately, because of the numbers of midwives leaving the profession. So, we're in this time of change. The thing that you said, Vic, about you lasted 6 years, that's the average lifespan of a midwife in New Zealand as well. Whereas, the midwives that we supported through the 1980s, as Anne said, we're all over 70 now. And so, those midwives are all who continue to practice are all retired and leaving, and the young ones aren't staying in. So the ability to access continuity of care is becoming less and less for women. And it's one of the reasons that I'm still busy working, because, we knew that was the model that women wanted, that was what we wanted. We defined that model, and we fought to set up a system that would provide it to us. And now it's being undermined. But it won't be saved unless you work with women. The two things have to happen together. Midwives need to regain their confidence in midwifery, but before that can happen, women need to regain their confidence in their innate ability to give birth, and they need to take responsibility. And I think that what we've seen, really since probably the mid 20th century, is the medical machine undermining people's confidence in their health and bodies. You have to see the doctors, and this is why this very latest thing that's happened in New Zealand, where midwives are now able to vaccinate pregnant women, is so dangerous. Because it's another, regardless of whether you think vaccines are safe and effective, that's a whole nother story. But if you keep saying to a woman, your body is not enough, you cannot grow a healthy baby and keep it safe, and you keep saying that to them all the way through pregnancy, from the first, ultrasound scan, the genetic screening, oh, you've probably got, gestational diabetes, which, Michelle O'Dawn famously said is a diagnosis waiting for a disease, like, all the way through pregnancy, we're undermining women's confidence in their bodies, and all the way through midwifery training and now midwifery practice, we're undermining midwifery's traditional kind of skills. But neither one will work unless we band together. And we have that wonderful experience from the late 1970s to 1990, when we thought we'd achieved all our aims. Like, here we are, we've set up this system where women can choose a midwife, and she can have the same midwife. They can work together through her pregnancy, and the midwife will respect all the midwives. We changed the law so that a home birth was on the same status as everything else in this country. Women can choose where they want to give birth. But gradually, and from my point of view, once we set up those institutions, the pull of the machine on the institutions became too high, and midwives walked away from women, and women lost their confidence. So now we're in this terrible situation where everybody is afraid. For a number of years, I had actually I ran an organisation that had a government contract for providing women with maternity information. And so women would contact us. It was in Auckland, which is the most populous part of the country in New Zealand, who were looking for a midwife, would contact us to find out how they got in contact with a midwife, how they accessed maternity care. And every day I would have a woman call me and say, I've just discovered I'm pregnant. I'm so scared. And I'd say, well, what are you frightened of? Like, women have been having babies forever. This is a completely normal process. There's nothing to be afraid of. But, so we have a culture of fear even before you get pregnant.
Mm. Gosh, it's so incredible listening to you. Do you know that after a very frightening first birth, I had the most marvelous midwife in 1997. And she said such a simple thing to me. She said, imagine a stream of energy coming in from the millions and millions of women who've given birth. And all you need to do, Liz, is plug into that. And the energy of those previous birthing women will help you. And I won't go into the details, but I had a completely natural second birth, having had a highly interventionist first, purely because one woman took the time to make me feel so confident in my body. Now, I do think we need to go there, Brenda. The reason for my reaching out to you initially, you and Anne, was to discuss and to show Victoria what's happening in New Zealand. It's very dark here now, Vic. As part of my research for this, I reached to friends who are midwives, and they have told me they've all had emails saying they are incentivized in New Zealand, Victoria, by payments to give vaccinations now. They will receive payments. And one of the ones I spoke to yesterday is absolutely horrified and said, how can that not be a bribe, Liz? And I can't speak out about it because I need the job. But that is absolutely bribing midwives who need money to vaccinate women who are pregnant when we know it can cross the placental barrier, don't we? Isn't that proven that vaccines cross that sacred barrier where a baby is protected from poison?
I think it's proven that the lipid nanoparticle, the mRNA-based vaccines cross the placenta. I don't know. I'm not aware about the traditional ones, but regardless, they create inflammation in the woman's bodies. And as I said in my intro, I worked as a childbirth educator for over 40 years. And so women started being exhorted to have flu vaccinations in about 2010 here. And then 3 or 4 years later, the DTaP, diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis was added. And,
this is during pregnancy, Brenda?
During pregnancy, yes. And midwives were supposed to recommend it. And in fact, on my contract as a childbirth educator, one of the bullet points was that I was to recommend vaccination. I used to put a little asterisk and an informed choice about vaccination and signature it. Yeah, so it's gradually kind of ramped up, and now we have, this vaccine that we do know crosses the placental barrier and introduces spike protein into the growing fetus. So it's a real worry, and I'm not sure that most people who even deliver vaccines are aware of that. I'm not sure that midwives are told that. I think the thing of incentivizing, I think you could see the payment, but I think you have to. The history of midwifery in New Zealand is a little bit different, since 1990. So midwives are paid to provide midwifery care, and one of the things that midwives and women who have been in this space have been really concerned about since the 1990s, more and more and more medical procedures have been required of midwives, in their contractual arrangement, but the modular payment that they get made to them has remained the same. So midwives, essentially, our continuity of care midwives, have been required to do more and more work for less and less pay. And so one of the things that we have been lobbying for a long time is that, if you're going to require midwives to do this stuff, you've got to pay them. Of course, we weren't lobbying for vaccination being one of those things. But so I think that partly, and it's not really much of an incentive. I mean, the amount of pay by the time a midwife pays her GST and her tax from the payment that she's, I don't think the payment is going to be the driver. I think the fear is going to be the driver. The fear of the thing that you talked about, that you lose faith in women's bodies and you align yourself with a medical model when you work in an institution and when you're institutionalized. And one of the terrible things that has happened, as Anne said, she had hundreds of midwives come probably through her practice in 40 years, is that as we have fewer midwives out there doing home births, we've got midwifery students now completing their training, never having seen a home birth. So you can't. It takes a rare sort of person like Anne and possibly yourself, whose family history, whose background, whose experience and knowledge was all in the hospital environment. You just step out and say, "Oh, but birth's normal. I'm going to assist women to have babies at home." That there's only going to be a tiny minority of people who come to that by themselves. And, the same for women, that in the home birth space, fewer than 5% of women will choose to give birth at home in New Zealand. Very few people come to that if it's not a culture, whereas, in my family, I've got 5 children and all my daughters have given birth at home because they were born at home, and even some of my daughters-in-law, you create a culture of normalizing that, and that becomes the norm, and that was what we were working to do in the 1980s. And I think we'd got the home birth rate in Auckland in the late 1980s, just prior to when we managed to get the change in legislation that gave midwives professional autonomy. I think in metropolitan Auckland, the home birth rate was closer to 10%. We doubled it just, by force of number and campaigning and visibility and all of those sorts of things. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Brenda. And at the other end of that spectrum is what they're doing in New Zealand, trying to encourage more and more pregnant women to have this COVID jab. We saw at the beginning, and we're leaving that question for everybody to think about, why would the Swedish health minister faceplant? What possible reason? We never saw anything like that before the COVID response rollout in 2020. So I'm going to ask everybody watching this to consider that when I ask you, Victoria, is there anything like that happening with pregnant women in the UK? Are they trying to force the COVID jab still in the UK on pregnant women?
It's in the NHS guidelines of having the COVID vaccine. So it's there. And if you read it, it's on the NHS pregnancy guidance. Now, I had 2 vaccines because I was dedicated to my profession. And I never disbelieved that the people that were teaching me about the most precious time of anyone's lives in birth would ever deceive me. I don't think outside of that malice, I wouldn't think of that. So I had 2 vaccines. I also had a 5-week-old baby when we went into lockdown. So I had a very young baby, and he was actually born on the first case that came out in Wuhan. So the day I was giving birth was also the days I was getting emails saying there's this deadly virus. So I was in fear as a mother and protection for my family and my baby. And I'd had a very traumatic birth, and I'd also had a very traumatic few years on labour ward. And as you probably both know, being on labour ward is like an acute A&E. It's not pleasant. It's noisy. I've definitely got some PTSD, the alarm in my head, and lots of flashbacks of really awful times, and you can't unsee what I've seen. Now, what I found...
Explain that for people who aren't midwives. Explain a little more on that. What is going on? What are you talking about there?
So when you're a labour ward midwife, you have to think quick on your feet. Midwives actually don't like labour ward. Many of them have anxiety going to labour ward. They absolutely they despise it. And if I've seen midwives leave because they've been forced to rotate to labour ward, and they don't want to do it. So I enjoyed labour ward because I'm a very fast-thinking, fast-paced person, and I thought I was doing good at my job and that I kept people safe. But what I didn't realise was it was crucifying me internally, and I developed type 1 diabetes 2 years after being a midwife. So my body went into shock. I didn't click with it all. And when I had my son, I went home and had 5 months of him at home, and I had to go back to work because my husband got made redundant in the lockdown. So I had a 20-week baby, and I had to stop breastfeeding to go back to work 60 hours on labour ward. Now, they never, ever gave me a break, ever. I was working so hard. Now, what really crept up was no women that I ever swabbed had COVID. That I had the chance to then see who I'd swabbed and check the results. So it was very strange that women just didn't seem to have COVID. And if they did, they had very mild symptoms and were very beautifully protected, and so was their baby. It was only into the vaccination program did I then start seeing an increase in admissions. So we'd gone from being relatively tumbleweed on the wards. You could cope with your daily tasks because women weren't ringing in and women weren't coming near the hospital because they were told to stay at home and isolate. So women were self-soothing. They all of a sudden didn't need to speak to anybody if they had swollen ankles or vomiting, that it wasn't as bad. They were like, oh, I'd rather put up with the vomiting than come to the hospital. It was the strangest time. And then when the vaccine rollout came in, I can remember being on labour ward, and this really sticks in my mind. We've got a stillbirth room called Snowdrop, and that room would be used once a month. And bearing in mind, I only worked 2 to 3 shifts a week, I would maybe see a stillbirth once a month. I was seeing it pretty much every shift. There was someone in that room.
After the rollout of the jabs?
Yes.
It suddenly, suddenly overnight seemed to just go...
It was
exponential.
Unbelievable, Liz. I was giving out hypertension medication like sweets. Everybody had raised blood pressure that came in. There was an increase in diabetes. It was unbelievable. I couldn't believe what happened. And the only common denominator that made me scratch my head was they've all had vaccines, and they've all had more than one, and they've all had a different brand.
Do you mean you had mothers coming in who weren't jabbed in your...
Never. Every woman was jabbed.
And that means they'd been jabbed during pregnancy. We just need to take that in. My God.
Jabbed during pregnancy. And you got to remember, I never saw any data. I never saw the trial. I never saw the email that proved that that the vaccines were safe. I feel very blessed. I've never given a vaccine to any woman ever, apart from anti-D. I've never given COVID, flu, or whooping cough because I didn't do the training, because I didn't work on that ward. And when I did work on the ward, I couldn't be bothered to do it because I don't want to sit at home and learn about vaccines. I hated my job by then, and I didn't know what was happening internally because I had this battle of, but I'm such a great midwife and I love it, and I'm going to have to leave these women. And then I'm going to have to go and then start again at 40 odd years old. And I'm like, oh my God, this is awful. But I can absolutely vouch, Liz, and I've talked to you about this. The women that were coming in had hypertension, abruption, more PPHs, growth restriction. They had an increase in miscarriages. They also had an increase in fetal abnormalities, especially brain. This has been confirmed by sonographers that I've spoken to that work at that hospital and others locally. So anecdotally, that's all I have is what I saw. I don't have data. But when I was there, I remember this day saying, what is going on? We've got all these really sick women and all these really sick babies. Oh, it's COVID. But none of them had COVID. They all had jabs. And that was when it didn't quite make sense then. It was only when I left and reflected back. And then I had the chance to start going on social media. And the place I found the information was on X because it's not censored. I didn't see it before because it's not on Facebook. And that's the only platform I used other than Instagram. I didn't use TikTok, and I never used X before. It was only when I went on X did I get this flood of, oh my God, oh my goodness, what have we done? And it's there, it's true.
But Vic, for those people watching this who go, oh, well, X, I mean, that's all conspiracy theories and it's all nonsense, it's not medically proven. What's your reply to that?
Well, there is an element of, there was some virus of some sort, if that's what people want to call it. There was clearly something, but all the flu statistics disappeared. What I think about that is it doesn't bother me if someone calls me a conspiracy theorist because a lot of it seems to be true. No one can take away the fact that during 2020 and 2021, those hospitals were empty. I saw it with my own eyes. I watched it. With the rollout of the vaccine, everybody was unwell. The phones were rammed, the hospital was rammed, the stillbirth rates went up, the outcomes worsened, the litigation claims have gone up, the birth trauma's gone up, the birth rate has gone down, the miscarriage rates have gone up. It isn't a rocket scientist.
Before we go to you, Anne, for your reaction, what's PPH and abruption? Just for people who don't know those terms, what are they?
An abruption is when the placenta naturally separates from the uterine wall, which can be fatal to mother and baby and needs medical attention straight away. PPH is a postpartum hemorrhage, bleeding after delivery.
Wow.
But we've also got to remember we've got increased induction rates and increased cesarean section rates. But I have also been told that 2 women at my hospital have had a cardiac arrest on the table and 1 has died. I've never heard of a maternal death in my whole career.
And I want your reaction. And please, to anybody, midwives, patients, mothers who are watching this, fathers who've seen things going on with their wives, please could you contact me, liz.gunn@freenz.org, if you have more information to add to what Victoria has just said and your reaction listening to Victoria.
Yes, thanks, Victoria, because you were working in a busy ward. I worked at University College Hospital, actually. It's one of my jobs in London. It wasn't like that. It wasn't what you're describing. Well, in New Zealand, we did have a Liggins Institute study to follow up vaccinated mothers and their babies, but that was in the early 20s, was it 2021 or so? That was abandoned after a few months, and we don't know why. The other thing I want to say is that in New Zealand, the ACC vaccine treatment injury from the data that we know this from an OIA request. It was sitting, those claims were sitting under 250 a year from about 2005 up till about 2020, and then after that it just shot up to over 1,205. That's vaccine treatment injury claims. But back to the midwifery and this initiative, this new thing in New Zealand now, that midwives can get paid to give vaccinations to pregnant mothers and to their colleagues. And I don't know if you saw the webinar, Liz, and I'm sure you could see it too, and it's quite a hard work to look at it because it's entitled From Mama to Pepe, the gift of antenatal vaccinations for Mama and Pepe, the vital role that midwives play. Now, you see, what that tells me is there's two different paradigms at work. To me, this is the horror of antenatal vaccinations, whereas they're calling it the gift of antenatal vaccinations. Mm-hmm. And there's a huge amount of data that support and the experiences you're talking about, Vic, of the increased PPHs, et cetera, But one thing I want to say, like in our Midwives Handbook for Practice, it says in our Code of Ethics that midwives have a responsibility to ensure that no action or omission on their part places the woman or baby at risk. And then also in our standards, we have a whole standard too. We have 10 standards that guide midwives' practice. And standard 2 is the midwife upholds each woman's right to free and informed choice and consent throughout the childbirth education. And it says that midwives facilitate this process without coercion. So it's a bit like the Bill of Rights. This has all been just thrown out the window by the College of Midwives and the Midwifery Council. But I'm very glad to hear you say that you've never given a woman a vaccination. And I caution, and we had some very good pamphlets that our mandated group have designed, and we gave them out to the midwives at the Midwifery Conference, not everybody, but to more than we would have if we hadn't been there. And my encouragement to them was, please get informed. Please don't start to give these preparations, these genetic, the COVID genetic engineered product, plus the flu vaccine, plus the DTaP. Please don't give it unless you're absolutely sure it's safe and effective. And here's some information which is referenced, and all of this references can be found on our website, which is Huia Kaimanawa. Yeah, and that's what I just said to the young midwives. And I think some of them were like, oh my goodness, like, we don't want to break the waters if that's going to cause harm. We don't want to refer to an obstetrician unnecessarily if that's going to cause harm. But of course, we do want to refer if we need help, if the woman needs help. It's just keeping your feet on the ground and looking clearly at what's presenting to you. But this is very, very concerning. Concerning is that's a nice political word. This is horrifying. Yeah. It's horrifying.
In England, Anne, midwives were paid more to vaccinate than they were to stay as a midwife, which meant we lost the agency midwives that used to work for us, went over to the vaccination centre and earned, I think it was sometimes triple time overtime pay. And some of them we never saw ever again because they continued in the vaccine centre. So we were left short-staffed when we were already at such a loss. And if you're talking about vulnerable women, well, why would you leave them so vulnerable with no staff? And this is what people don't realise. Midwives actually loved that they could vaccinate and save to buy their own house.
Yes, well, and there's that aspect. The other aspect is that the architect, I think she calls herself the architect of this initiative for midwives to get paid to vaccinate. One of the points she makes is that the uptake for pregnant women taking the vaccinations will increase hugely because women trust their midwives.
Oh,
It's the perfect environment to get that woman vaccinated.
And we'll do anything to have a live, healthy baby.
it's so cruel. Who is the architect in New Zealand? Can we name her? The architect of this dark system?
I don't think I want to name her here. You can find that on the webinar, which is on the IMAC website page. But this is the other thing. She was a very dedicated home birth midwife back in the day. It's a very curious situation.
It is heartbreaking.
It's very dark.
And we will put the website underneath this interview. I'm also going to cross-reference 2 interviews I've recently done, one with Sasha Lachapova, who is an expert who was actually invited by RFKJ to work with him. But she's talking about these injections being bioweapons. And so she didn't quite qualify because she's too rebellious, I'd say, and such a very original thinker, a critical thinker, that she was never going to conform to any of this. She believes they should be stopped right now. But I'm going to put that underneath this, and also a call for a stop to these bioweapons. It looks as if DARPA and the Department of Defense in America are behind the development of these. Brenda, I want to come to you because you mentioned that critical word Anne talked about, which is informed consent. You said you put an asterisk for the women, informed consent. Women need to go into their pharmacists and ask, before any further injection, if you're thinking of taking one, ask for the leaflet out of the box of vaccines. For the COVID leaflet, it's blank. Are you aware of that, Brenda? It doesn't have all of the adverse studies, and it's been something we all could have done. And they've never told us about it, obviously.
They can't get the side effects on the leaflet because there's too many. It's 9 pages long.
9 pages. And so they've just put a blank leaflet in the box telling you how many side effects and how dangerous this is. Were you aware of that, Brenda, when it comes to...
No, it's not something I followed up. I mean, I was aware of the 9 pages, so that has come up in various groups that I'm involved with. But women, I think, where you've still got to go back to stopping, to somehow supporting women not to be afraid of birth and to have confidence that a healthy woman will grow a healthy baby and birth a healthy baby and be able to breastfeed a healthy baby. But we... right back at that stage, everybody is lacks in confidence, and then we've had this kind of propaganda campaign for years now over the whole COVID stuff. But prior to that, we had the propaganda machine churning out the worry about whooping cough in particular in New Zealand. So the highest uptake, obviously, with any vaccines is the worried world. The middle class, reasonably well educated, worried world. That they hear all of this, and as a childbirth educator, it was very, very difficult to discuss vaccination and childhood vaccinations or pregnancy vaccination in class because of it's like a dogma, and you say one word wrong and somebody will report to you. I managed a childbirth education contract where I employed childbirth educators, and every year I would have a doctor or health official call me because some parent who had been in a class had made a complaint against the childbirth educator who'd raised a concern about vaccination, or even introduced that there was a possibility of not going along with this. So everybody was very, very frightened about talking about vaccination in class and in public. But the lack of logic always kind of got to me. So when they started introducing the DTaP, the diphtheria, tetanus and pertussis vaccination, occasionally in class someone would say, what do you think about pregnancy vaccination? And, and I would only be able to say, well, how many people do you know who have had pertussis? And, I'd have a class of 24 adults and there'd be absolute kind of silence. And it's like, so why do you think your baby is going to be at risk of getting pertussis if you don't know anybody who's ever had it? It's like that the propaganda campaign, ramps it up to being so much more prevalent and worse than it is, that everybody kind of is like, we can't go outside. I had parents say to me that, because we do this thing of cocooning, I'm sure they do it in Britain too, where not only should the pregnant woman be vaccinated against DTaP during her pregnancy, but also her partner and the grandparents and anyone who's going to be in close contact with the baby. And I had some couples in the class who were so frightened that if their parents refused to have a vaccination, they weren't going to be able to see the baby.
My goodness.
And this was particularly the case when I was teaching multiple birth classes, because those women are even more frightened because, it's so high risk having more than one baby at a time. They're so medicalised.
It's how do we
So it's a machine that, and although I didn't clock that comment about the architect of the midwifery vaccination, but certainly the arm of medicine in New Zealand that's been promoting vaccination forever has been trying to get midwives involved in vaccination. So it's been a continuum. It's not something that's just popped up overnight, designed by somebody in particular. This has been a move that's been going on for a long time, and midwives have been called out on a number of occasions for not promoting childhood vaccinations. That the rate of it used to be that the rate of vaccination of children whose mothers had continuity of care from a midwife was lower than women who had other forms of maternity care, because, again, one of the things that we built into the system that we set up in the 1990s was informed choice. And, and that's something. And so midwives who truly work in partnership with women in this continuity of model are consistently offering women and supporting them to make informed choices about whatever it is. But more and more, those choices are being kind of directed in one direction with fear tactics, and also because, as you discovered, Vic, you become institutionalised. You start parroting the party line, as it were. So and you don't. Most people aren't even aware that they're doing it. They've bought into the fear. This baby could die. And I say to people, just take a step back. Like, we're still here. It's the 21st century. If there was something intrinsically wrong with the reproductive capacity of human woman, we wouldn't still be here. And there's so many indicators, but we're so the propaganda is so strong that unfortunately our midwives and our women are buying into it. And
we need. Sorry, Brenda, what were you going to add there?
And really just being led like lambs to the slaughter to things like pregnancy vaccination, but also, induction of labour, surgical birth, and believing that that's necessary and that their babies were saved, instead of questioning that.
It's getting late for Vic in the UK, and so we'll need to start to bring this to a close. But before we talk about what women can do and how they can get back to finding their power and being fear-free around birth, Vic, I do want you to allude a little bit more to what you said at the beginning. You referenced the Rothschilds being involved in this whole medicalisation of birth, this whole inculcation of fear in women. What do you know about that, Vic? Have you looked into that side of things? Certainly it's something people can research.
I think when you start questioning any institution and you start digging, before you know it, you are Alice in Wonderland.
Yes.
And it's very dark and it's very overwhelming. And you have to try and then keep yourself in a space of good healing and nurture and positive, and not fall into their fear. But I do believe having the reality of exactly what this is has helped me heal my journey. So finding things, who funded Big Pharma, who funds Big Pharma, who funds Pfizer, which doctors on the television over here are pushing that vaccine, then finding out that they were paid, like Dr. Hilary Jones, Dr. Ranj. Dr. Ranj is a pediatric doctor. All of these people were funded, which is in mainstream news, that they were paid by these professions. And if you think it's happening to midwives, well, it's been happening to doctors right at the very beginning. And I think when I really started looking into it and understanding, I thought this was a localized problem. I thought, right, how can I get out and then try and make change with the MPs? I thought, I literally could slap myself and go, what were you thinking, you silly girl? But actually, it was enriching to understand that there are three things in this whole world that are controlled, and it's economic, legal, and political. And they've got hold of all of them. So it doesn't matter if you raise an alarm on something in health, the judiciary system is corrupt. So you're never going to be found in favour against the NHS. It's a protected characteristic. So they're never going to. I mean, I Googled midwifery cases against NHS. You can't find one. What? Midwives have been around for over 100 years on the register, and not one employment tribunal can be found. Come on. So it all starts to make sense to me. So then when I started looking into the Rothschilds and looking into things like the economic with the Titanic and the Olympia, and the Rothschild then, owning pretty much every country in the world that has economic power, and then looking at that and then linking it to all these institutions, they fund our doctors' careers. They fund our education systems. They fund our banking. They fund everything. And Anne, you touched on the Bill of Rights. Oh, when I heard that, I was like, thank the Lord. The Bill of Rights is huge. I talk about this, Liz. I love this sort of stuff. Bill of Rights, Coronation Oath, Treason Act are the three things everybody needs to know about, because they stand in law, and we have forgotten who the bloody hell we are.
Yes.
Against these people. And something I've learned is to stand in my sovereignty massively. And this year I have been threatened, I've been attacked, I've been legal action, and I've used my sovereignty every time, and they have ran a mile, because they cannot touch me based on my losing my fear. I don't fear you anymore. What are you going to do to me? Okay, what you want to run me over? You want to take? I'm not scared of you. If that's my path, that's my path. And I'm not going to give you an ounce of my fear. None of it. That fear remains in me for something that is meaningful to me. If I'm scared of a bear, I'll be scared of a bear. But you are just a bully, all of them. And it's so sad that so many midwives have to leave. And I'm sat here with another midwife who left after 6 months. She was gone. She was broken. She wrote on a Tesco receipt why she should leave that job that night when she got in her car. And I never saw her for months. And I was like, where have you been? Where are you? And she was like, I left ages ago. And then another midwife, Tess, who left and is now a whistleblower. Tess refused to give a whooping cough vaccine because she was never told it had tetanus in it. And it wasn't in the e-learning. She refused to give it, and she was referred to the NMC for fitness to practice. So these monsters, whatever you want to call them.
stands for what, Vic? NMC?
Nursing and Midwifery Council over here.
Yes. Yeah.
So just to let you know, Anne and Brenda, I relinquished my PIN in April last year after I was called a baby killer online, which I'm currently going to court for. So
I just need to say here, I personally know Victoria's journey to this. I've been through it, absolute persecution when you stand up and speak the truth. You have to be able to bear it and go through that valley of the shadow of death. But Victoria's has been equally horrific in the UK. They really launched an online campaign against Victoria, and you had to go through your dark night of the soul. We won't go into that story here, but it's been very tough, hasn't it, Vic?
Yeah, that was the worst. Well, Brenda and Anne, if someone said you were a baby killer, it's probably the worst thing you could ever be called as a midwife. And for it to circulate online was really horrific. But I stand today in my power, again, in my sovereignty and my truth, my authenticity. You know, I didn't kill any baby, and that's how I stand on that. But so for me,
and you weren't even involved in that case that they rolled out. That you weren't even there at the time of the birth, I should say.
No,
that's very important.
No. So there's a High Court case on this, which is currently in process for defamation. But when you learn who funds your degree, I'm telling you now, you'll change your bank account like I did, so you don't even have a remnants of evidence that you were ever paid by these evil people, because I couldn't even bear that the NHS had touched my bank account. That's how repulsed I felt by the end of the journey. But I can't find the love for midwifery. I genuinely could not imagine touching or going near a pregnant woman. Genuinely. I couldn't do it, and I don't think I will get past that. I've lost faith, and I think I need a long time, because if I am in any way, shape or form damaged and traumatized in areas that I still haven't dealt with, I will project that to women, and they don't deserve it. So for me, I believe my whistleblowing is it's cathartic and it's the end, and I will tie it up, and eventually I will just move on and start a whole new chapter of employment.
And what a loss she is. But I also want to say here, what a loss you are. You, if it wasn't for COVID, you would still be mentoring young women like Victoria, wouldn't you? And bringing them through into their power as midwives and helping them to believe in themselves so they could help the mothers believe in their own ability. Would you not, Anne?
Yes, I would.
What a loss.
And I just need to check why my phone looked like it was dying. I'll be quick. Yeah, I'm so sorry that you've gone through this. And anyway, I think I just want to say a couple of things to finish. That how many, I'm reading off our pamphlet, how many people know that the Pfizer jab is a gene therapy with no long-term safety in studies? And also, I just want to go back to, actually, Brenda's helped me a lot with this. Informed consent is not the same as informed choice. We need to use the words informed choice, because informed choice requires full information disclosure, including risks. So that's important. And yes, I'm grateful to find, there's 4 of us on this Zoom. I'm grateful to find you both. Liz, I did want to thank you for all the work you did through those early years. You were one of my guides. Thank you, and shining light. And yes, I think that's all I want to say. Thanks. Unless there's a specific question.
There could well be a follow-up. I know that Victoria's had quite a lot to do with a wonderful doctor called Kimberly Biss, and it could be a follow-up, Victorian. Actually, Vic, I wonder if you would bring these 2 marvellous New Zealand midwives into some of your UK groups of women who are standing up for a better system for mothers.
I'll be honest, I've been sat here tonight thinking, because this isn't localised even to county or country, this is a worldwide attack on women.
Yes.
A planned assassination of the disconnection between mother and child, which will ripple through the life of mother and child and ancestral communities. We need to connect on a worldwide level.
Yes.
It has to happen, and we need to be talking about this on a worldwide level. However that looks, I don't know, but I do believe, a bit like what Freedom Train has done, connecting different people, there has to be this just collective consciousness of what's going on.
Yes, for women, for the women working in it, Brenda. It's important to finish that we as well as linking, that we now give the mothers of the future hope that we can make a new system. You've done it once already, Brenda, in the 80s. You're in your 70s now, but you've got a very young energy and a very clear thinking brain. Will you keep going? Will you keep going in this horrendous battle that we're seeing now? And what is your advice to the mothers to come, Brenda, to finish off?
Well, yeah, I mean, I will keep going while I've got breath in my body. For a long time, I said that I'd keep going so that my daughters could have safe and normal births, and that has happened, fortunately. And now I'm thinking, well, I've got granddaughters, so I probably have to keep going. I just touching on the word that you raised, Vic, about sovereignty, like that, it's really, I don't think that this is a new thing. Birth is so incredibly kind of powerful right throughout history, and of course the witch burning is the famous example, but even before that, there has men in particular and people who are power hungry have tried to take control of the birthing, a woman's reproductive powers. And I think that we do just have to step outside. And while I'm peripherally aware of, the impact of the Rothschilds and the other big American family and so on, I think that we have to bring it down to a kind of a local level where we're talking woman to woman, and like just saying, like whenever you're in contact with a midwife or a pregnant woman or a woman who's likely to have a baby, to just say, congratulations, this is normal, isn't it wonderful? You're going to have a baby. You can do it. Like your body's designed. There's nothing to be afraid of. Just look after yourself. Connect with your baby. It's a wonderful gift. And to try not to get caught up in all the things that are trying to separate you from your baby, which continue with the imperative now that women have to, as you did, go back to work after their babies are born, rather than having that exclusive mama baby time through the first year at least of the baby's life. But certainly, I could go on for ages. Those of you in New Zealand will remember the Paid Parental Leave Act. That used to be, maternal leave, but we generalised it over parents, and then it was introduced. It was extended to 6 months, I think, by Sue Moroney. So that women could complete that time of exclusive breastfeeding. But now, then it was changed to the Parental Act so that the dads could stay home and the woman could go back to work, which of course meant that they weren't going to continue to breastfeed because breastfeeding wasn't valued. But the other thing, a colleague of mine, just on the topic of the day, used to say, a childbirth education topic, a childbirth educator used to say to her parents when she was talking about breastfeeding, is that, every time you breastfeed your baby, you're vaccinating your baby, because you're giving your baby maternal antibodies. And I think just little things like that they won't resonate with everybody, but we've got to just start kind of putting things out at a local level and try not to kind of get overwhelmed by this kind of global power shift that is trying to hoover up everything, hoover up our sovereignty, hoover up who we are. But as you've discovered, if you stand in your sovereignty, and you certainly, Liz, as well, all the work that you've done, if you stand in your sovereignty, you do become, it takes a toll, obviously, but you do become unassailable. Like there's a kind of a sense of self that people recognize and stop, like it stops them. It's like this, as you say, I'm not afraid. When you release, when you give away fear, you become powerful, and that power is recognizable by the people who you come into contact with. So, yeah, I'm still very much dedicated to working at the grassroots kind of level rather than the higher kind of level, woman to woman. family to family. Yeah. And in this part of our lives, the sort of maternity thing, we can only be strong if women and midwives continue to walk forward in partnership or regain that partnership.
Yes.
It's not going to happen if, women can and are walking away, excuse me, with free birthing, but birth is always much safer if you have a dedicated midwife walking alongside you. Yeah.
Beautiful. It was so wonderful personally to experience a completely disempowering hospitalized, medicalized birth where so much fear was put in me that I lost my focus and my confidence. And then the second birth where I had somebody there, a woman who simply believed in my ability to do it. And because of that, I lost the fear and my body was able to do it. That's my advice to all women. There's a wonderful saying, the only thing to fear is fear itself. And we heard Vic, you say, I'm not scared of any of you. I'm not scared of my fate either. There is nothing to fear unless we give it fear. And your final advice to women who are looking at having babies, and perhaps also to those women who are thinking, I would like to train to be a midwife and I would like to help other women give natural births. What's your advice, Anne?
Oh, well, join our group, because there are a couple of other online groups of midwives who are dedicated to supporting each other in physiological normal birth. So look for those sorts of groups, and our group is one place. I think that's the main advice at the moment, Liz, because the system is overwhelming. So like in the 80s, we found each other. There were 20 home birth domiciliary midwives, but we found each other because the women linked us in. And as Brenda said, we can't do anything without the women. But I think we have to have the immediate cessation of these products for pregnant women. We need a full independent investigation into these products and their safety issues. Yeah. And we need, there is support, as you know, Linda Wharton's group, etc., support for those injured by the Pfizer jabs. So I think, as Brenda said, that grassroots community of support and awakening is there. But in pregnancy and childbirth and midwifery, yes, I'll just do what I can. I'll do what I can when I'm asked. I'm grateful for the opportunity to express some thoughts today. I hope it's been helpful to
If any women training want to reach out to you, Anne, would that be all right, even if they are in the UK, perhaps and we'll put a contact address underneath this. And Victoria, what a delight it's been to have you on. You are such a gorgeous warrior soul. You are such a fearless soul. And I think you're waking so many women up around the world, young women up to their own warrior soul. So your wish for what people could take from this interview, mothers and potential future midwives, to feel more empowered. What's your wish for them, Vic, at this stage?
I would say about taking your time. Growing a baby is not just in the moment of fertilization. It starts long before then. It's in your early teens. It's your connection to your body. It's loving every bit about your body that you absolutely loathe in those years. Because when you get older, you look at your belly and you go, I had my babies in there. You don't see that when you're younger. And that journey starts right back when you're a young girl, about how you see yourself. And all young girls want to be princesses and brides and have babies. It's, quite common when they're playing around with dollies. It starts there, but also just take your time when you're pregnant. Take your time. There is no rush. The system serves you, not the other way around. If you want to go to an appointment and you need time, just say, I just need some time. Don't rush me. And actually, we need to start changing the system through women and educating the women to say, thank you for your time today. I would just like to go away and look at my informed choices, and I'd like to come back. That will then push the system to have to start looking at how they facilitate women coming back to have further discussion that they might not slot a space for normally. So it all starts with the women and educating those women. And it's just about taking your time. because making choices in pregnancy should never be in that very moment. It's a reflection of time and space in your heart-centered space, not in your fear. And that to me is absolutely huge, because I met every woman in a space of fear, of litigation, fear of loss of job, fear of loss of reputation. Did I ever really put those women into that centre? Absolutely not. And that is the truth.
I'm going to end with one very brief story from my first birth. This baby would not stop crying. She'd had forceps and a obviously very squashed scalp. So I took her after a week to the osteopath, and the osteopath worked on her for hours. And that night she slept through the night. So I went to my doctor the next day, really excited. This osteopath has worked on my child's the ability for the cerebrospinal fluid to flow up and down without it causing these terrible headaches. And he said, "Oh, don't go to those people who work on their heads. You just have a bad-tempered baby." And that was like a slap. He might as well have slapped me right across the cheek. I thought, why am I giving my power away to this doctor? My baby's like an angel when she sleeps. She's adorable. And I walked out of that place. He gave me such a gift, really. I said, I will never give my power away again. I will question everything, and I will find what is best for my health and my baby's health. And I will find the answers. So I say that to all mothers. Let's have a talk again, another catch up in the future. It's been a delight to talk to all of you. And I thank each of you for your courage in speaking out. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Liz.